Thank you, Shona. Kia ora, everyone. Warm welcome to you today on this very crisp, but yet very sunny Tamaki Makaurau Day. And also for those of you beaming in from elsewhere, either home or office, very warm welcome to you all. My name is Anthony Phillips. I'm from Heritage New Zealand, Pouhere, Taonga. Very pleased to be working with our partners at Auckland Council Archives, Libraries, and New Zealand Archives New Zealand. Today we will have a range of speakers who will offer their expert views and assistance on how to research your home or your place of residence, or perhaps a place that you have an affinity for or you grew up in. You'll go away today with a range of tasks, tips, and some good little ideas on how to go off and perform your own research at home. We'll have a range of speakers, of which I will introduce, I beg your pardon. Sounds like an interview, doesn't it? I will introduce at the start, but we do ask if you just could hold those burning questions you have to the end. No doubt as we go on through the session today, you'll have some other questions to ask. We're going to start with Mr. Owen Gordon. Owen was born in Northern Ireland, initially trained as a musician in Manchester, and a good part of Northern England, and in Berlin, and worked as an orchestral player in London for 8 years. Further study in New Zealand led to a new career in libraries and information. A very good choice, Owen. Starting as a library assistant for Waitakere Libraries, before moving to the Central Library as a member of the Information Services and Research Centre teams. In 2018, he joined Auckland Council Archives as an archivist, working with the corporate records of Auckland Council and its predecessor agencies. If I could warmly welcome Owen to the podium.
Thank you, Anthony. Kia ora, everyone. Thank you for coming, and hello to everyone at home as well. My name is Owen, as Anthony said, and I work downstairs in the central office of Council Archives. Today, I'm going to cover the most useful series of records that we hold that are common to all of the legacy councils in the Auckland region, talk about some of the regional differences and gaps in our holdings, and also talk about some useful property-related records that are unique to certain councils. I'll also mention a little bit about how Auckland Council was formed and how that relates to the records that we hold. But just first, I'm going to start with a very quick look at property files. Often when people contact us researching property, one of the first things we suggest is actually not to come in and see us at all. We suggest that in many cases, the information that they're looking for can be found on the property file for their address. And these can be ordered from the main council website. Property files are managed by the Building Consents Department and should contain details of building and resource consents and any correspondence that council has about the property. The contents of the property file very much depend on whether council's aware of work done on the property, the age of the building, and what records have actually survived from legacy councils. So what do we do then if there's nothing on the property file? This is probably the point where people might want to contact Council Archives, and also where it could be helpful to know a little bit about the history of how Auckland Council was formed. So today's Auckland Council has been formed as a result of successive local authority amalgamations. In 1883, there were actually 73 local authorities across the region, and over time, these amalgamated. By 1989, there were 8 main councils across Auckland, and then, of course, the amalgamation that formed the super city in 2010, these were amalgamated to form Auckland Council. And how does this relate to record keeping? It can be useful to know which agency actually controlled the records for the property you're interested in. Right in the center of this slide is a little portion of Oniwa Road. And you can see that the boundaries of the local authorities completely surround it. So where somebody might think that Birkenhead or Northcote Borough Councils controlled the records for that property, it's actually Waitemata County Council, maybe a little bit unexpectedly. Oops. So moving on to what does Auckland Council Archives do? Well, we hold documents created by the various local government bodies in Auckland since the 1860s. Our responsibilities come from the Public Records Act 2005, which requires us to create, maintain, and make publicly available documents of archival value. We select what documents we keep, and then describe and arrange them so that these can be made available for council staff mostly, and for the public to use for research purposes. And here's a little picture of one of our storage areas downstairs. Many of the record series that we hold concerning property are common to all of the legacy councils across Auckland. However, there are significant gaps in our holdings, as well as some records unique to certain councils. It's also worth remembering that we don't actually hold everything. So I'm just going to read you a short snippet from a 1993 Manukau Council report. It is alleged that the previous manager, prior to her departure, had ordered several truckloads of materials dumped at the Whitford tip, as it is unknown by the staff if any of the missing documents were mistakenly taken to the tip because no inventory was taken at the time. And this just goes to show you that it really depends what has survived and what's been transferred into archives custody. For example, a lot of very early records from road boards and highway boards haven't survived either, and other materials, as we can see, have been destroyed. And we'll move on now to something we do have, which, although in the case of properties, not very many, photographs of houses and buildings. This one's rather unusual, actually. It's from a small series, AKC 024, of historic buildings in Unihunga. And these were selected because they had particular heritage values, and it was worth taking pictures of them as a record. It's quite unusual that we have pictures of individual houses, and it's not something that we tell people to get terribly excited about. The photographs in our collection, we do have a lot of photographs, but most of them tend to be sort of portraits of mayors and councillors, or we've got a very large collection of aerial photography dating from about 1940. We do have some series of photographs for buildings, mainly in the Auckland central area, and these were usually done for particular purposes, like town planning studies. For example, we've got photographs of Freeman's Bay, Ponsonby, Grey Lynn. The Grey Lynn photo essay, ACC 064, was actually created around the time of the urban renewal study reports of the late 1970s. We've also got quite a few pictures of council projects like pensioner flats. So here's an example of two aerial photographs from 1940 and 2017. And you can see, obviously, the difference in the waterfront and the railway station and the surrounding area. Perhaps this is more interesting to people looking at the history of their house. This is a detail from a 1968 aerial photograph of housing in Glen Innes. And you can see just how much detail you can actually see in that. And over time, of course, you can see the difference in the building footprints. You can see even in this where washing lines have gone up, where people have had vegetable patches, all sorts of interesting little details that I think are quite fascinating. So it wasn't until the Municipal Corporations Act of 1876 that local councils had the power to create bylaws to deal with building issues. Even then, until about the mid-20th century, the introduction and enforcement of building regulations by council was very inconsistent. For instance, Birkenhead Borough Council bylaws in 1910 required people to make a building application and to lodge plans and specifications with clerk, but there's no indication that duplicate copies were to be supplied. Yet Takapuna Borough Council's bylaws in 1915 state, a person shall lodge with the council complete plans and specs in duplicate. Some councils, oh, sorry, here's an example of a sample of building plans taken from the property files in Devonport around the time that they were amalgamated into North Shore City Council. And these were actually separated because they were deemed to be very valuable, and there were fears for their safety. So they actually took them out, but they are just a sample of plans that we have for Devonport. Some councils also dispensed with the need for plans completely if, in their opinion, work was of a very trivial nature. So frequently, many people who altered the homes didn't actually bother getting council approval at all. And as a result, there's a fair amount of unpermitted building work on houses out there. While we do hold building permit plans for large parts of Auckland, these haven't been, as I said, these haven't been kept consistently across the legacy councils, or else they haven't been transferred to archives. The series of Auckland City Council building permit plans, AKC 305 and 336, is actually the largest that we have. It contains plans for commercial and residential buildings, some applications, specifications, and information on these files varies from property to property, and in fact, some of the building permit envelopes are completely empty. The contents of these plan series have been microfilmed, which is series AKC 339, and these plans range in date from around 1908 to 1997. Looking at Mount Albert Borough Council, we have a sample of 32 site files, which contain building specifications, but we don't hold any building permit plans for this area. And it's a very similar situation in Mount Eden Borough, where we only have a very small selection of building plans and specs. We do have building permit registers, however, which cover 1905 to 1990. So when we can't find building plans, these index cards, registers, and receipt books can provide us with some very useful information. They can give an idea of when the structure was constructed and the type of building work done. Generally, building permit indexes and registers will give information such as the date of the application, permit number, names of owners, contractors, and details of any proposed building work. Now, plumage and drainage records are probably not the first thing you think of whenever you're researching your property, but they can actually provide some quite useful information. The records won't necessarily tell you when a property was constructed, but they can indicate when a building was first connected to drains or had plumbing installed, which can give you an approximate idea of its age. And the types of information on these would be things like the name of the street, the permit date, permit number, the property owner, the street number perhaps, and the contractor, who was either the plumber or the drain layer, the type of work done, and the date it was completed. And here's an example from a Northcote drainage plan, which has quite a lot of information you can see. Another resource, rate books and valuation rolls, can be very useful in tracking the age of a property. From year to year, if there's a significant increase in the rateable value, that could give an indication of when a structure was built on it or when substantial alterations may have been made. The information in the valuation and rate books will give you the name and occupation of the owner-occupier, address of the property, legal description, and rateable value. We hold a lot of records from the legacy councils, although bear in mind that there can be significant gaps in these. For example, Auckland City's valuation rolls cover the years 1877 up to 1990, but the majority of the rate books weren't kept because they were mostly duplicated information found on the valuation rolls. A similar story is with Mount Albert Borough Council, where their rate books and valuation rolls, we have nothing after the 1950s. And this is just an example from the Mount Eden Borough Council from 1913. So with rate books, in addition to the information found in the valuation rolls, rate books will also show the amount of rates charged and payments made to the council. We'll move on now to records that are quite unique to particular councils. And one of the most heavily used series for Auckland City Council is the valuation field sheets, ACC 213. Auckland City Council was quite unusual because it had its own valuation department when most other councils used government valuers. The field sheets start in 1912 and go to the late 1990s, and these give year-by-year valuations of properties. They record the legal description, address of the property, and the nature of any improvements and permits. Valuers also noted the approximate age of the building, which can be quite useful, particularly around the beginning of the 20th century. As well, changes in property ownership can be traced, as the field sheets record the name of the occupier and the owner over time, plus their occupations. Many of the sheets include sketch plans and newspaper clippings about them, particularly when they're being advertised for sale. Another set of field sheets are those held by Mount Eden Borough Council, and these date from 1955. They don't have as much information, but they do record the owner-occupier, the legal description of the property, street address, yearly valuations, improvements, zonings, and details of any valuations, improvements, permits, and rents. Another series unique to Mount Eden Borough is House Connection Plans, MEB 008, which date from about 1918. These will show the footprint of the house along with sewerage, drains, and stormwater connections. They also give the name of the owner, drain layer, street address, and date. Also unique to Auckland City is the 1908 map, which we have one sheet of here showing Mars Park, Queen Street, and Grays Avenue. This is a significant record of Auckland City's history and early infrastructure created by the City Engineers Department. It's a series of plans that show the location and position of streets, footpaths, tramways, post and telegraph department fixtures, electricity department fixtures, gas, sewers, water, and buildings throughout Auckland City. On each building is an indication of how many stories it was and the type of construction materials that were used. Annotations were made to the map up until at least 1918-19 and up to 1923 for some parts of the city. Back to more unique records. Again, termite records, again, not something you'd really imagine if you're researching property, but Australian subterranean termites were a serious problem at the beginning of the early 20th century. The Department of Agriculture monitored the importation of seeds and living trees, but it had no control over things like power poles, sawn timber, and railway sleepers that were flooding into the country from Australia and elsewhere. And these carried with them termites, and these proceeded to cause significant structural damage to residential properties. In the 1940s, the Termite Act was passed, and this gave trained inspectors powers to search for and eradicate termites. And there was a local body termite committee set up, consisting of those councils in Auckland that were considered termite infested areas. Between 1940 and 1980, up to 50,000 properties in the Upper North Island were inspected for termites. And often in treatment involved the destruction of those timbers in which the termites were found. The Termite Act was repealed in the 1970s. So we hold the records of the Joint Termite Committee and Mount Eden Borough Council's records of termite inspections. These include inspection records, reports, registers and maps of infested areas. And typically these relate to individual properties and record what was found and what action was taken. So I'll just show you a little picture here of a termite inspector looking at termite infested wood. And then we'll go back to unique records. Takapuna also has what we call Land Information Memorandum Worksheets, TCC 003. And these are maps of the Takapuna area showing building footprints. And these have been annotated to indicate various building permit dates and numbers for the years 1926 to 1990. We've also got a very early set of survey maps for Devonport Borough Council. And again, these show information about the type of building, materials, and record allotment numbers and landmarks. We don't know the exact age of them, but we suspect they're from around 1883. We also have some interesting files on property from Waitemata County Council. We have some farmland roll property files relating to farming in the West Auckland area. Just to finish, if you'd like some more information about Auckland Council Archives, you can visit our webpage, and that's on the main council website. Unfortunately, our database isn't searchable at the moment, but we're working on a new one, and hopefully that won't be too long before it's available to the public. In the meantime, there's still plenty of information that's really interesting, and we have lots of PDF lists that are available for download. These include research guides. We have series lists for South Auckland. We have also a list of early Auckland Regional Council records, which we manage. And we also have timelines of the various local government agencies for the whole of the Auckland region from 1862. They're well worth having a look at. I've actually printed off some of the property resources that are available from the website, and I'll leave those on the desk outside if you'd like to take one with you. Finally, we're situated in 2 locations in central Auckland, as I mentioned, in the basement of this building and across the road in Bledisloe House. Our contact details are there, our phone number and email address, and you're very welcome to contact us if you've got any questions about researching your property. Thank you very much for listening. I'll pass you on to Joanne. Thank you.
Thank you, Owen. I didn't realize we were going to learn about quite such unique records, particularly termites. If I could please welcome, actually, oh, Stephanie.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry, Stephanie.
While Stephanie's coming to the podium, Stephanie Van Galen is an archivist at the Auckland Regional Offices of Archives New Zealand. She has worked in the information sector for 30 years, so a wealth of knowledge. Part of Stephanie's current role involves working with maps and land records, which she particularly enjoys. Please, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Stephanie.
Kia ora koutou. As Anthony says, I work at Archives New Zealand in Māngere. I'm one of a team of 4 archivists, and we've all been using the land records that came to us from Land Information New Zealand for more than a decade now. So we're all quite knowledgeable, so please do ask us questions. So I'll just quickly talk about the role of Archives New Zealand. We're governed by the Public Records Act 2005. We're the memory of government. Our role is to regulate government record keeping, preserving records of long-term value, which document people's rights and entitlements and decisions of governments of the day. A lot of these records are still required for legal purposes, and that's also the case with our land records being used still by surveyors, people doing developments and current conveyancing. And another role is to provide access to the Taonga on our care, and that's over 7 million records at this point. One thing you'll notice about government records is almost everything's numbered, and that'll become pretty obvious as I talk. And that's because most records are registered in some kind of record system, and part of Archives' role is to preserve that record system. So the way that you have to search the land records, it's not because we've done that, it's how the records were created by the Lands Department. So some of the useful records that we have for researching property are deeds, records and Crown grants, cadastral maps and plans, applications for certificate of title. We also have valuation rolls, but these have come to us from the valuation department. So it's the government copy of the valuation records. And we also have standard house plans. A couple of links that might be useful for people. We have some research guides on our website. One is all about land, and all the 4 offices of Archives New Zealand have land and property records. And so sort of what I'm talking about today would be available in archives in Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin, but the records relating to their particular area. There's also another research guide about whenua, Māori land, and I'm not going to be talking about researching Māori land at all today because it's registered totally differently and it's administered by the Māori Land Court, and it could take a huge session all on its own. So, finding deeds, records and Crown grants. So to begin, what you really need is the original legal description of the property. So that's the section number and parish or survey district, or you need a deeds index reference. And so how do you find the legal description? So there's a couple of different ways, or several different ways. You can find it from the first certificate of title that was issued, and this might have a deeds index reference, and you can order these from LINZ. It could be on your rates notice or the website homes.co.nz, which has a current legal description and is a really good starting point. You can often find the legal description from deposited plans and also from cadastral maps and section plans. And so here's a certificate of title, and on the top left corner, there are a whole lot of prior references. And if something says in the top left corner, volume and folio, that's always going to be a prior certificate of title, and they're held at Land Information. One of the other references could be a transfer number, and that's held at LINZ, an application file number, a warrant, or there might be a DI or deeds reference, deeds index reference. And the deeds indexes, they've all been digitised and they're available online via our collections database. I just thought I'd show you homes.co.nz. So I just, at random, picked a property in Aroha Avenue in Sandringham. And where the green arrows are on the PowerPoint, one is showing you that it's lot 5 of DP 17968. And it gives you a valuation number, and we can use that valuation number to go to a valuation roll. So the 2150, that's the roll number, and then 386 could be the valuation slip, and 00 might be a suffix. So this little entry is saying that the house on this property was built in the 1920s. And it also gives you the certificate of title number, the current certificate of title. And so I've gone to the deposited plan for that section and highlighted in green, that shows you the original section number. So this is a plan of a subdivision from 1923. And that gives you allotments 155, 56 of section 10, suburbs of Auckland. And deposited plans are really useful. The top left corner, or sometimes the bottom left corner, have what they call references, and it's the source maps that we use to make this one. I had a researcher say the reference plans are a bit like the whakapapa of this map. It's telling you how they got there. Often a DP will also give a certificate of title number. So in my circle at the bottom, it says here comprised in CT 196 something, I can't quite read it. They might also give you an applications file number, and then we have those application files at Archives New Zealand. What was interesting for me about this map is that the property I was looking at on this particular map, the street is called Troonville Avenue. So a DP can also show you that the street name has changed. We also have R plans, which were a set of cadastral maps kept by the District Land Registrar in Auckland. They're really useful because they have the original parent section number. So the property that I was looking at, I don't know if you can see, but there's a bigger kind of section number here. And that shows you that all of these parts are a piece of that bigger section. It also has deposited plan numbers for all the different areas. There's references to the New Zealand Gazettes. Some sections have a deeds index reference, a proclamation number, or a certificate of title reference. And on this map, part of Aroha Avenue is still called Troonville as well. And so I've often used this type of map to help somebody find the starting point for their section. We also have some of the original section plans from sort of around 1850 to 1900. These are all hand drawn, and we have them for the city of Auckland, Auckland suburbs, Howick, Otahuhu and Panmure. And this one is for the same area that Troonville Avenue was on, and it's section 10, suburbs of Auckland. And it was section 156, which is about on the far left row, about halfway down, and it's got the name Holmes and Pettit. So some of these plans have the first owner's name on it. Oops, as I'm destroying the furniture. Okay. But how we find all the ownership history of a property is using the deeds index. And once you've got a section number, you need to check the parish index, which then leads you to the deeds index. And the deeds indexes list transactions for a property, including a small plan of the section. They might list crown grants, mortgages, leases, probates. And what's really useful about them is, as well as showing the chain of ownership, they have a where recorded column, and that gives you the deeds book and page number, which has the full text of the deed. There's also a reference column, and that might refer to another deeds instrument or deeds index. There's also references to application files at the bottom of a deeds index. And this is an example here. A lot of the ones online are handwritten, and fortunately for the Auckland, Central Auckland one, quite a few of them have been typed, so it's easier to read. But I've got the green arrow, and that's showing you the where recorded column. So the very first line is a conveyance, and that's Holmes and Pettit selling the property to Langdon in 1849. And that instrument was registered at Lands and Deeds in 1849, but the Crown Grant, which is actually the first ownership record of the land, wasn't actually filed with Lands and Deeds till 1855, though the land was granted in 1845. And we've got some instructions that I can send to people about how to search these records. They're available as a PDF, and if you're interested, you can send an email to our general inbox or come and see me at the end and give me your email address. We hope eventually for it to go online on our website. I've just got a few more things to add before that happens. And this is just an example of a deeds register book. So on the previous page, I mentioned an 1849 conveyance. So this is actually a copy of the first part of that conveyance. And so you can see it's got a little section plan for the sections being sold, and it gives the survey dimensions. And these are actually still used by surveyors today, often. Currently, we're actually doing a whole lot of work digitising these deeds register books. The original volumes are bigger than A3, and some of them weigh 10 kgs. So for our staff, it's a great thing to be online and not have to be got off the shelves. And at this point, we've done about 25% of the 800 deeds books. And one of our staff is doing it as part of their weekly work, just fitting in some digitising a few times a week. And you can search for some of the deeds register books and collections. if you know the deeds book number that you've got from the deeds index, you just type that in the search box, and then you can use the filter function to select the series of Auckland deeds registers and location held at Auckland. So application files, which are applications for certificates of title, these are used a lot. They recorded, or they were created when people were needing to move their land from the deed system to the land transfer system. And so what they contain is a handwritten search of the deeds index records, and that often has maps or annotations by the search clerk. Some of the files include the original Crown grant, and you can search for these in collections by either searching for the application file number and then filtering that, or you can search for the certificate of title number if you have it, or for the legal description of the land. So say you were looking for allotment 31 parish of Pakuranga, you could put that in the search box and see if it comes up. So the valuation roles, I find these quite useful. When I first started at Archives, one of the questions I had to answer quite a bit was, how much was my property worth in 1980 when I first got married? And that was for people that were getting divorced. And so they needed to find the value that was paid. And we don't get that asked that question very much now that some of the legislation about joint properties changed. But this example is for the same property I'm talking about that was in Aroha Avenue. The valuation roll number today is 2150-38600. And I don't know if you can see in the very top left corner, that says valuation reference 215-386. So this is the roll from 1972, and it's still got that valuation reference. And so that tells you it's got the deposited plan number and the lot number. So I know that it's the right property, as well as it has the street address and the owners, and it's got the capital value and the land value at the time. And these are from Mount Albert. So I was interested to hear that you said you've got gaps for Mount Albert. So we've actually got a whole lot of valuation records for that area. The slip at the bottom of the screen on the right is a valuation roll from 1952. That's got the address of the property as Troonville Avenue. It gives you the certificate of title number. It tells you that there's a building, a dwelling on the house. And then it's got a thing which says O/I, which means other improvements. And you can see it's been annotated, that the owners have changed. It also has the reference on the very last line, which says 96/2380, and that's the prior valuation number. So we can go back to the previous valuation roll. What's useful about these as well, sometimes people think somebody owned a property, but it was a Crown lease. And so these valuation books will say that the owner's the Crown, and it would give you the occupier's name and details. Some of the books are also annotated with the sale price and date. These are in rolls from sort of the 1920s to the 1950s. And you can do a general search for valuation rolls by area. So if you were interested in valuation rolls for Mount Albert, you could just go toggle on our advanced search and type Mount Albert valuation, and then put in a range of years. So I've just put 1910 to 1920, and we've got 13 records that cover that time, and they'll be little books of valuation slips, and they go street by street. People love building plans, and I know that's often what people are looking for. This is actually very like my house where I live. So we have standard plans from the Department of Māori Affairs. And how it came about, there was a separate scheme that was houses built by the State Housing Division and managed by Māori Affairs. And that was because it appeared that a whole lot of Māori weren't getting loans from state advances. And so they set up a separate scheme through Māori Affairs. So we've got some promotional images like this one of some of the standard plans. And then we actually also have the standard drawings. So this is from a book of plans from 1964. The ones we have cover 1937 through to, I think it's 1982. And as with the state advances plans, a lot of houses were very similar, but they might just swap things around and have 2 bedrooms on the left-hand side of the front door and one in the lounge on the right, or swap them around, or just position the house differently depending on where the sun was. Our Wellington office also has standard plans for railways houses. So if you've got a railways house that was built sort of around 1910, there might be a little standard plan. These are all held in Wellington, as I mentioned, and they've all been digitised and they're available online in the collections database. So to find this, I just searched for standard drawing railway house and limited it by years. And I also filtered by show me what's digital, so what's online. I haven't got an image of it, but I did find a beautiful station master's house from 1910, I think it was, and it had what all the joists and frames and sashes were made of. So it told you it was Totara or Rimu, and all the dimensions. We've also, in our office, got some registers for locating railway houses in Auckland and Hamilton. We also have a group of records called the Fair Rent Files in archives from the Department of Labour. And so the Fair Rents Act of 1936, it set restrictions on increases in rent and put in process a system for recovery of the property by the landlord if they wanted to live in their house again. And a lot of the fair rent files are listed by street address. So this one is from Aroha Avenue again. It might include, the file might include a court summons, a counterclaim by the tenant, information about the amount of rent paid and the length of the tenancy, and background notes about the tenancy written by the Labour Department staff. And the handwritten note on the right-hand side of this is some information about the property, that the tenants have been living there since 1929, and this file's from 1950. It said that it had information on individual family members and that they'd tried to obtain a state house in 1942 and again in 1948, but they were unsuccessful. So housing crisis isn't new in New Zealand. And why we've got this file, there's all information about the rent, but the landlady wanted to take possession of her property again, and she basically had to go to court to evict her tenants. With these files, you can actually search for street address and see if we have a record. A couple of things that I forgot to do slides about are discharged mortgages. So we have a whole lot of discharged mortgages for North Auckland, which is Greater Auckland. They're listed by the names of the owners, and they also have the section number and parish or survey district. We also hold consent to sale or land valuation records, land valuation files. So when two parties were trying to sell property in, I think it was 1940s, 1950s, and if there was a mortgage on the property, it had to get a valuation and it had to go to the Land Valuation Court for approval. So the consent to sale files actually give you a bit of information about a property. They give you the value, they talk about the chattels, and a little bit about the condition of the property. And I just thought I'd mention about our database collections. If you haven't come across it yet, there is a section called How to Search, And one of the sections is on advanced searching and filtering. And that actually does allow you to limit searches quite a bit by date or by type of record, or if you just want to look for photographs or maps and plans. And there's also information here about creating an account with archives, which if people are doing remote inquiries like to one of our other offices or wanting to pay for digitisation, they need to have an account so they can pay. And so we're very happy, more than happy to help people who want to come in and do land research. And you're welcome to send us an email, use our online form, or come to our reading room. And I must mention about our reading room that unfortunately next week, from Monday the 19th of June, we're going to be closed for 3 weeks because we're having building renovations, including removing toilets and things. So we can't have the public visiting during that time. So we're going to be closed from the 19th of June, reopening on the 10th of July. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Stephanie. I don't think when you started your career that you were planning on giving matrimonial property advice. I'm sure that's been very helpful to some parties. Thank you. Next, we have Joanne Graves. Joanne is a research librarian here at the Research Centre of Auckland Central Library, where she has worked for over 10 years helping people with their family and local history inquiries. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Joanne.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Anthony said, I work at the Research Centre here at the Central Library. There are 4 research centres, one out at Henderson, West Research, North out at Takapuna, and South out at Manukau. So if you are thinking of researching your house, you could walk into any research centre and get help, but bear in mind that the individual research centres may have material that's more relevant to your search. A really good place to start is simply with books, because they're going to give you a really good background on what you're searching. If you look at it a bit like family history, where you're searching a person and then you sort of go wider and examine the greater family. With researching a house, think of it in terms of you've also got community around, you've got a neighbourhood, but you've also got things like, for example, with the books that we can offer, local histories. So you can read a local history and get an idea of the neighbourhood and how it's changed over time. Architecture and building, that can be really interesting in terms of your house and the style. You can delve into a book and look at the different styles, for example, villas, bungalows, state housing. It can be well covered. So don't just think of digital, but think of books as well as a good way to get information. Some examples there, for example, the book, we call it Home, the History of State Housing, and not just sort of in terms of the actual house itself, but, you know, how did state housing begin? You know, how did it progress? Building up that picture of your house and your neighbourhood. Serials too are often a good way to go. This Home and Building is one that we have in the basement of the library. It is also digitised on the New Zealand Electronic Text Centre, but I particularly like this one because it's advertising Fibrolite for the holiday home and how things have changed. And that's 1950 something? I can't quite see the date, but they're so much fun to look through, these magazines, because not only are you getting ideas of the physical building, it might have interviews with architects, with builders, but you're just getting a really good picture of New Zealand history. Directories and electoral rolls. Directories you can look at to trace a street, for example. Electoral rolls, I was just having a play around with Shona just before, because while you think of electoral rolls as searching for a person, you can, through Ancestry, search by a street to build up a picture of who lived there. Ancestry is available at all the Auckland City Libraries, not just the research centres, but at every Auckland City Library you can rock on up and use the public computers and access Ancestry. And as I said, we were having a play before, Shona and I, and we actually just typed in a street and the area, and it brought up some hits. So it might be a bit of work and require a bit of patience, but don't just think about the electoral rolls as searching for a name, but also in terms of searching for an actual street address to see who lived there. These pictures show directories which we have on the shelves here at the library on the left-hand side. And like I say, you can look up, I think they go up to the 1950s, you can look up a street and often it will have, for example, say Queen Street, Onehunga, and it will have the list of the people who lived there on the left-hand side of the street, and then it will have the right-hand side of the street. On the right, we've got the physical copies of the electoral rolls. As I said, up to 1981, they're digitised. We do still have them in our store, but post 1981, we have every third year on the shelves here in the Research Centre. You can just browse through them. If you needed to look in the intervening years, we would just get them for you. Newspapers are a really good value, and Owen mentioned in some of the files at council that some of them may have had the advertisement of the house when it was advertised in the paper. And I actually did an inquiry on this recently where somebody had bought a house in the 1990s, but there was a bit of a dispute over the house to do with a cross lease, and they needed to prove that when they bought the house, they needed to prove how it looked at the time. So we were able to go back to the central leader in the early 1990s and comb through and find the advertisement for that house, lovely little colour picture, which showed that the house was exactly as this person said it was in 1993. So it took a bit of grunt work, unless you know the real estate agent, because if you think back to the housing for sale supplements in the papers back in the day before the internet, they were really huge, but we got there. So we have copies of a lot of local community newspapers, Central Leader, for example, the Point Chevalier News. One of them, which was interesting, was one called the Manukau Progress in the 1950s. So they were the small community papers like the Central Leader, but they were so chocker with information. They're just a goldmine of information back then. And the Manukau Progress, for example, included areas Mount Roskill, Balmoral, Sandringham, Wairaka, Three Kings, Epsom, Royal Oak, Greenwood's Corner, Hillsborough and Waikowhai. So a really big area of local history in those papers. I mentioned the different research centres before. So for example, the Franklin Times, you would most likely find it at South Research, as against here at Central, because we are focused more on the central collections. If you think of the old Auckland City Council before amalgamation, that's what our focus is, although we do have more material as well. The Historic Land Survey Plan is a unique little gem that we do have. The bottom shows what the card is. It looks like that. And you look at it on a microfilm or microfiche reader. And what they are the plans. They were filmed from the 1970s and they cover from the 1870s to 1996. And they show the legal boundary of the property. To find a plan to see if we've got one, all you would need is your DP number from your rates invoice. For example, that one there, DP 19048. And assuming they're all filed in the correct place, we would be able to go down to our basement, to our cabinets and search through and find the file, find the plan. Sometimes they're not there. It's possible they just weren't there when we were given these from Land and Survey. Chances are, hopefully not, they were misfiled, because if they are misfiled, then we haven't got a hope of finding them. There are just so many of these. But I had a go at finding the property for the house I live in, and I found it. And they will often list as well things that might be happening outside the boundary of your property, and potentially give another DP that you can look for. A point to note, and I don't quite know why, but they actually have no legal standing. So if you've got a copy of your Land Survey Plan and there was some sort of legal dispute, apparently you couldn't use it in court. But once again, it's all just building up a picture of your house. Digitised collections. Digitised collections are being added to all the time. So they're a really fantastic resource. Kura Heritage Collections is the name we give to all the different databases, which have sort of merged onto this one big platform. From maps, cemetery records, manuscripts, photographs, aerial photographs as well. The beauty of Pouhere is that it's reasonably easy to search. It's on our Auckland Libraries website. It's a massive database. You can just do a simple search. For example, if you were searching your street, type in and see any information it brings up. It may bring up nothing. I mean, it's not as specific as sort of going to archives and researching, but it may bring up photos. It may bring up a reference to something that happened in your street that was indexed in terms of news. You just never know. The maps, for example, here's some examples of maps that are digitised. On the right, we have the Benfield Estate in Mount Albert. So when that was subdivided and was sold, that's what the advertising for the map looked like. I want to point out the no online image available, because if that comes up, all it means is you found a record, you found information, for example, a map or a photograph. It says no online image available, and it's just exactly that. It hasn't been digitised yet, but there is a record for it, and there will be the photo or the map somewhere within the collection, probably within Sir George Grey's special collections. So don't panic if you're searching and you see that. It's actually a good thing. It means there is a record, but it hasn't been digitised. So you would then be most welcome to contact the library to find out how to access that record. Another thing that we've done on Pouhere, I'll just go back, which is a Pouhere Heritage Collections, which is a new database as a streets and parks database. So a few years back, we had a streets database, which was made up of web pages of street names, and there were several databases. This has been enhanced. It's all come into this new streets and parks database. It also includes the meaning of the new Te Reo Māori names that were given to parks and reserves recently, which was a venture between Auckland Council and Mana Whenua. And you would, if you were searching a street, you would find references to your street, and if it has been included in the street and parks database. So Pouhere Heritage Collections, of course, you can search from home to find what you want. If you catalogue, of course, you can search from home to find books and magazines and come into the library. Bear in mind that at the research centres, our collections are reference only. So if you came into the research centre, you can browse the shelves, find a book. You can look on the catalogue then to see if there is a borrowable copy at another library if you wish to place a hold on that. But the material in the research centres is reference only. The website, at any Auckland library, you can use the websites such as Ancestry and Find My Past, and you will just need your library barcode and PIN number to log on. And like I say, you can use them at any Auckland City library. You do not have to come into the research centres. And finally, for further help, on the website, we have a research inquiry form. So you are most welcome if you're stuck or you want to contact a librarian or you want more information, to use that form. It will guide you on the information that is needed, and it will get sent to one of our reference librarians in our virtual team, and they will assist you with that. So don't panic if you've come unstuck. Maybe you just need a bit more guidance on where to search, and you can't come into the library yourself. So do feel free to use the research inquiry form. I think that is it. So thank you very much, and we look forward to hearing from you with your inquiries.
Thank you, Joanne. I am a regular user of the research centre, so I do reiterate this form does work, and staff are incredibly helpful. So thank you, Joanne. Our next speaker today is one of my esteemed Heritage New Zealand colleagues and a fellow colleague based in the Auckland office, Alexandra Foster. For those of you who are familiar with the New Zealand Heritage List, Harangi Kōrero, formerly known under our previous legislation as the New Zealand Historic Places Trust Register. Alexandra is one of our esteemed colleagues who is responsible for the mammoth body of research and assessment that goes behind those listings that you eventually see on our list. Alexandra is, of course, based in the Auckland office. She is responsible for preparing those list assessments and the research. She has a background in history and teaching from the University of Auckland. Please, everyone, welcome Alexandra.
So, kia ora koutou, as Anthony said, I'm Alexandra and we work together at Heritage New Zealand. Based in the Auckland office. So a quick background on who we are to get started. We're an autonomous Crown entity and we administer the Heritage New Zealand Pouhere Taonga Act 2014. We used to be known as the Historic Places Trust. We are the same people if you have heard of us before. We are governed by our board and Māori Heritage Council, and our purpose is to promote the identification, protection and preservation of the historical and cultural heritage of New Zealand. So we do this in several ways. We maintain the New Zealand Heritage List, Rārangi Kōrero. We regulate effects on archaeology. So if that applies to anything that is related to pre-1900 human activity. So if you want to make any changes to your house and you think it's pre-1900, get in touch with us and we'll let you know if the Act applies. We also provide conservation and advocacy advice about heritage places, and we're the largest small museums operator in New Zealand. The New Zealand Heritage List is the only national statutory record of our significant heritage places. There's about 6,000 entries across the entire country. It's a very inclusive list, both typographically and chronologically, covering a huge range of significances from, say, physical significance, like its architecture, its archaeology, to its historic values, spiritual or social importance. So undertaking research for the list and assessing both new places and our existing listings to improve our information is the main bulk of my work. So I actually use most of the resources that everyone else has been talking about. So rather than cover the same territory, I'm going to outline some of the questions that we think about that you might find really useful when you're researching your own places. And I'll also touch on a few of the secondary sources which we do hold, which you might find useful. So firstly, what makes up my place? The best way to understand any place is as a whole. So that includes land, buildings, structures, any in-ground material, any plantings, and even chattels, if you've got some features that belong to a previous owner. So you can learn a lot about a place from looking at all that physical material, as well as the documentary information. I know Owen and some of the others mentioned that sometimes plans don't exist anymore. And so you can actually look at your house to see how was it built, when were different sections added, just by looking at how they connect to each other. So it's your house itself, or any place you're looking at, is a really good source of information. So places are always made up of multiple layers of history and significance. And so we always try and consider all of those different layers. A place might be architecturally significant, but it'll also probably have some historical significance to do with previous owners or how it was being used or how it's valued by the community. So I've got a picture here of Corbyn's estate, Corbyn's winery in Mount Lebanon Vineyards. So that place has an ancestral Māori footprint associated with Te Wai Panuku, the waterway beside it. The site was then used for grape production before it was taken over by the Corbyns, who then built a succession of buildings as their business developed and expanded from artisan production to being an international export business. So there's all those different layers that we can pull together. So places aren't isolated, but geographically or historically, and those contexts can provide a really good basis to think about why they're important or what the history is. You might consider where and when the place was created. Was it part of an early farm or a later subdivision? Was it created at the same time as other places in the neighbourhood, or was it much earlier or later? Is it connected to wider events like a government state house building program, or was it created during the Depression or a period like that when there wasn't much building going on? We found a building we were researching very unusually was built during the 1890s, during the middle of a period where we know that there wasn't much construction activity because there was a Depression, and it turned out that it was constructed then because the previous house burnt down and the owners had an insurance payout. So this is an example of one of our listings that's got quite a few of these different elements. So this is the Northern District's Combined Headquarters Bunker. It's Category 1 historic place. It was built during World War II to be the military headquarters for the Northern region. And so it's got really strong associations with the war. And post-war, it was a civil defence centre until it had a fire and burnt out. But this is a very recent layer dating to the 1940s. Before that, it's got a very long history dating all the way back to when it was known by Māori as Te Pouhere and was a really important maunga in the Auckland region. So in the centre of the image here, you can see the top of that maunga. So this is right beside Mount Eden. And you can also see the quarry that had started being dug to get all of the stone from the maunga. And so a lot of that rock was then used to build roads in Mount Eden. The bunker itself was built in the top of that quarry, which existed, and the rest of it is now a multi-storey car park. So, well, within the quarry, so it's not very tall, it's very low. And so by looking at all those different layers, we're able to really understand the importance of a structure that from the outside doesn't look like very much, but is really, really important. So some of these sources that we have available, we have our list reports. So any place that we've got on our list, we generally hold some information. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but you can look at our listing information online on our website. Often if a place is, if the place you're looking at is near a listing, we might have some contextual information. So it's a good place to look to see if we've got anything nearby. We also hold research files on our listed places and a number of places that aren't on the list. So feel free to get in touch and see if we've got any research info. Same thing with conservation plans. Final conservation plans we hold in our library, and you can view those as well. And the last source I'm going to mention are our archaeological reports. So for anything that's gone through the archaeological process, there will be a report written about it, which combines a lot of the historical information. And we make those available also on our website for anyone to look up. And so this is our search function, how we search. So you can put in any amount of the text that you want, look up a street name, look up a address or a name of a house. And if it's there, you'll be able to look it up and download the report from our website. And you can find all of those on heritage.org.nz. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexandra. Last but certainly not least, Marguerite Hill, one of our colleagues at Auckland Council. Marguerite is a heritage researcher at Auckland Council and has previously held roles as curator human history at Canterbury Museum and project curator history at Auckland War Memorial Museum. Ladies and gentlemen, Marguerite Hill.
Kia ora koutou. As Anthony said, I'm Marguerite and I'm a heritage researcher at Auckland Council Heritage Unit. A big chunk of my time is spent researching historic heritage places, much like Alexandra, and I have used the resources of our esteemed colleagues very regularly, so thank you. My colleagues have already given you lots of great research advice and avenues to look up, so I'm going to just finish off with an overview of some other resources that are available to you when you're researching your house. So I'll start with some council resources that you might find really useful. The first is the Auckland Council database, which is called the Cultural Heritage Inventory, or the CHI. So the CHI is a database of thousands of heritage sites around Auckland. It includes historic heritage, maritime heritage, archaeological sites, and sites of significance to mana whenua. Unfortunately, the CHI is currently offline, but we can search the database for you. So please do contact us on the email, one of the email addresses I'll put up at the end of the talk. If your house is scheduled under the Auckland Unitary Plan as historic heritage, then we should have some information about your home. You can find out if your house is scheduled through the Auckland Unitary Plan Historic Heritage Schedule 14.1, which is available online. The amount of information we will hold will vary. It could be legacy council documentation, or it could be a historical summary that's been written by a historian. So again, just contact us at the Heritage Unit for more information. So another useful council tool is geomaps, and this is available to the public. As well as planning information, you can see that there are aerial photographs, usually going back to 1940. So you can choose and slide along the different years to see what your property looked like, your section looked like over time. And you can also go back to the 1908 City of Auckland map, which Owen mentioned as well, and you can see that for the central city area. Auckland Council has also created area studies, which can help you find out more about the context and the history of your neighbourhood. We currently have 11 heritage surveys and area studies, which are available on the website. And I'll just cover a little bit about more recent records of title and other ways to access them. Stephanie's talked about the ones that are available through Archives New Zealand, but I'll just talk a little bit about the ones, how you can access them through LINZ and Land Online. So records of or certificates of title will tell you who owned your property and when the property was sold and subdivided. They can also tell you about mortgages and sometimes leases. And you might already have some of your certificates of titles from when you purchased your house. So as well as records that are held by Archives New Zealand, certificates of title and other documents are held by Land Information New Zealand, which is also known as LINZ, and a system called Land Online. In the last few years, they've made these records more easily available to the public through Land Record Search, which is an online system, which you can see up here. If you have a credit card, you can purchase and download historical and current certificates of title directly from this website. And they only cost $6 each now. They used to cost $15, so that's quite a good saving. Joanne mentioned cadastral maps like deposited plans and survey maps that are available through Auckland Libraries. If you can't get them through Auckland Libraries, you can also purchase them through the same website, again for the $6 fee. Now, certificates of title and deeds indexes are legal documents, and they often contain very technical language and jargon. So LINZ has actually put together a really helpful glossary that explains some of the terminology that's used in the documentation, which is really useful. And here's a link to that. They also have really good guidance about where you can find all the different kinds of records, which ones are held by LINZ, which ones are held by Archives New Zealand as well. As we saw earlier with geomaps, aerial photographs can be a really good way to research your property and to help you figure out when your house was built or when the area around it was developed. So RetroLens is a fantastic resource. It's a free collection of aerial photographs from 1926 to 2005. It's a Crown archive and it contains 500,000 images. It actually covers the whole country. The photographs are high resolution and you can download them. And it has a Creative Commons license. So if you're wanting to put together a publication or a blog about your research, you can reuse the images very easily. It's not as well geolocated as geomaps. So sometimes it requires quite a lot of jiggling around and toggling until you can actually find your property. But the quality of these images is fantastic. Other image sources include the National Library, particularly the White's Aviation Collection, which is a wonderful aerial photography resource, many of which are now free to download from the National Library website. Auckland Libraries and Auckland War Memorial Museum also have lots of photographs and aerial photographs. And I'm just going to talk about a few more general resources. If your property was designed by a known architect, so it's worthwhile to try and figure out whether their professional archive has survived through time. So places like the University of Auckland Special Collections, Canterbury University, the National Library and the Auckland Library have extensive architectural plan collections. You can just search their catalogues or inquire directly to find out if they hold plans by your architect. For example, the University of Auckland Special Collections houses the old Architecture Library collection, and it includes plans and drawings, architects' biographical files, journals and publications. You don't need to be affiliated with the university to access these files. You can just research as a member of the public. If you're interested in a former state house, Taonga Ora has a large archive about individual former state houses. They hold 20 or 30,000 microfiche plans for houses built between 1937 and 1987, as well as photographs. And you can email them directly for material on that email address there. And one that I don't have a slide about, but is also quite useful, is the Fletcher Trust Archive. Of course, Fletcher's is such a huge building construction company in New Zealand and has been for a very, very long period of time. They actually have really fantastic records and archives there. So it's well worth contacting them, and you can just find them through a web search. So by now, you're probably curious about the people who lived in your house, that you found their names on the certificates of title or through documents on Archway. Small fragments of information may add up to a narrative about the people who once lived there or designed or built it. And you can just plug some names into Archives New Zealand or Papers Past. You never know what you're going to find on Papers Past. Another valuable search source is Trove, which is an Australian repository, which has recently had a reprieve and is now going to be funded again. But it actually has a lot of New Zealand material, which is really helpful, especially newspapers. The Encyclopedia of New Zealand is another useful source. It was published in the 1900s and has great biographical information about all sorts of people, and it's available through the New Zealand Electronic Text Collection. There are also websites like Find a Grave and Million Graves, which have images of headstones, and you can get biographical information from those photographs and those pages. And of course, you can utilise genealogy research tools at your local library. Another fun place to look is the New Zealand Police Gazettes. You never know, if someone who's lived in your house has gotten up to something dodgy, you might find them there. And the digitisation of service records because of the First World War centenary has also opened up lots of really amazing options for research. Another useful tool is the historic births, deaths and marriages database, which is part of the Department of Internal Affairs. So this is a historic database only. It only has very limited information, but it will give you basic information about birth, death and marriage dates without you having to pay for a certificate, which costs $33. So the births do need to have occurred more than 100 years ago and the deaths 50 years ago for privacy reasons. But you can actually get quite good information. So this is one of my ancestors who died in 1944, and you can see his age was 70. So that will help you find birth records and information, and perhaps an obituary once you know what year to look in. Now, I always recommend this tool because not everybody knows about it, and it's actually quite nifty. This is the Reserve Bank of New Zealand inflation calculator. So if you want to understand the relative value of a house, building materials or wages over time, you can just plug in the information to here and it will tell you what it would be worth in contemporary money, modern money. It goes all the way back to the 1860s. And it really helps you understand the context of the property and the work done in the time in the past. And last thing, a little plug for a guide that the Heritage Unit put together last year, which is an overview of many of the resources that lovely people before me have shared. And you can access it through this website here and also through other parts of the council website. We weren't able to print out very many copies. I'm sorry that I just waved a printed copy in front of you, but we're hoping to do another print run with a bit of an update before the end of the year as well.